Hi there, I'm Angela. Welcome to the channel or welcome back. In today's video, I'm doing something just a little bit different. Stick around and I'll explain. Hey y'all, thanks for stopping in. If you've been coming to my channel for any length of time, then you may know that other than sewing, another one of my big hobbies is gardening. I'm a pretty avid gardener and I do a pretty big vegetable garden every year. And as most of us gardeners know, April and May are probably the very busiest months in a gardener's life. I'll put in like a couple little short video clips of my garden in case you're interested, and then I'll explain why that's relevant to this video. I start almost everything from seed, and this is the time of the year that things are getting transplanted out. And I have to say that this past week, I have spent every spare minute other than when I've been at work or sleeping or like spending quality time with my family. Like every minute goes to the garden. Therefore, I have not done any sewing, like zero. So what I thought I would do today is to kind of sew while I talk with you guys. I hope that sounds interesting to you. I understand if that's not your cup of tea, feel free to just skip this one, totally get it. But if you think that might be interesting, please feel free to stick around. It's not going to be a sew along per se. I will be working on my next make. It's a Vogue pattern. It's a pair of pants here. And it's part of the capsule wardrobe that I'm working on. I haven't even started on this. I've cut out the tissue pieces from the pattern and I've pre-washed and dried my fabric, and that's it. So I thought this might be a good time to kind of get started on this and hang out with you all. And maybe you'll find it kind of pleasant to listen to while you're sewing, or maybe while you're doing housework, or maybe I can keep you company while you're doing those kind of maybe mundane things during your day. And if that sounds good to you, let's get started. So I've got you over here on my sewing table. I'll try to adjust so that you can see what I'm doing. And as I mentioned, all I've really done is cut apart the tissue pieces, and I've got my fabric. I don't think you can see it, but it's over on the other side of the table. And I'll kind of explain my process as I go. You might find that interesting. I know we all kind of do things a little bit differently, so maybe it could be helpful for you. So let's get going. The first thing I'm going to do is to dry iron the tissue pieces to get them nice and smooth and flat. And then I was thinking that normally what I try to do on my patterns is trace them. And I've got tracing paper here. That's so that if I want to make the pattern in another size, I can. I haven't totally destroyed all the sizes. However, I'm thinking I'm just going to go ahead and cut out my size, like the size that matches me best right from the tissue. I will have to make some adjustments, so I'm still going to need my tracing paper. And I'll kind of show you that as I go. If you're interested, this tracing paper, it's actually medical exam table paper. It comes on rolls. I got this on Amazon a couple of years ago. It came in a carton of, I think, 12 rolls, and it was pretty reasonable. Maybe it was like 30 something dollars, and I think it's going to last me like for the rest of my life if I live to be to a ripe old age. I'm only on my second roll now because when I do use it, it's not like I'm using gobs and gobs of it, and the roll's pretty packed. It's pretty thick. Just in case you're interested in how I handle that. So I'm going to get started with ironing my tissue. In some of these parts, I may kind of speed up because it may not be something that you're interested in seeing all the details, or it might be a little bit noisy, like crinkling of the paper. And according to the measurements on the pattern piece, for me, I'm going to cut the extra large. I do have my measurements in the description box below in case you guys are interested and you might find that helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out, this is the front that I'm working on right now. I'll get this one cut out, and then I'm going to iron the back and the waistband. There's just 3 pieces to this pants pattern, so that's pretty nice. And it just occurred to me, I didn't really give too much information about the actual pattern. So it's Vogue V9246. It's one of those all-in-one wardrobe type patterns. And the fabrics called for linen blends, crepe back satin, lightweight gabardine, and ponte knit. I'm using a ponte. And they're just pull-on pants. They have a waistband in the front, and then in the back it's elasticated. So pretty easy, pretty simple. I think it's going to be an easy make. And I've got my 3 pieces cut out, and what I'm going to do next is to make my adjustments. I've shown these on the channel before. These are my pants templates that I made, that I use pretty much every time I make a pair of pants now. It has like the perfect curve here to fit me. And I'll kind of go into a little detail on how I use this. And then the other thing that I want to make sure that I do is to measure my inseam. I'm not always good about doing that. And while I'm only 5'6", I feel like my legs are longer, like in proportion to my body, like short-waisted with longer legs to make up a total of 5'6". So pants often fall a little bit short on me. So I'm going to make sure that I measure these pattern pieces really well on the inseam and make sure if I need to make any adjustments that I do that. So I've got my back piece laid out here with my template. And I wasn't sure if I would need my tracing paper or not, and it turns out I do not. So what I do is the first thing that I do when placing this on, and I guess I should preface this by saying that this is just something I made up. I don't know that this is the correct way, and I never had any formal training in fitting and whatnot. So from just kind of watching videos and reading and sewing books, everything I could figure out on how to make pants fit me, this is what I've come up with. So take it with a grain of salt. You might be able to find some good takeaways from it. And the first thing that I do is line up the point here in the bottom of the crotch. So I want that to be matching. And then I also want to make sure that the grain lines are right. And so what I have done to make sure that's right is I've got my quilting ruler here. I can just line this up on the grain lines and make sure that both lines are parallel, that they're straight. They don't have to be like overlapping each other as they're drawn on the pieces, but they need to be parallel to each other to make sure the grain is right for both of them. And it turns out that my template piece was not quite right. So it takes a little bit of fiddling. I don't make pants enough for this to be like a super quick process, but I'm getting, better and better as time goes on. So let me take a look at this. So I feel like this is a little bit closer. I'm just going to leave my ruler kind of down here while I fiddle the pieces around. And it's looking pretty spot on. I don't know how well that is showing up on the camera, but I've got my grain line on my tissue piece straight with the ruler, and then my hand-drawn grain line on my template looks like it's very straight too to the ruler. So and my point still matches. So while I've got this in place, what I want to do is to tape my template to my tissue piece. And for this, I just use, this is also a medical supply. It's just that paper tape. You can iron over this. I got this on Amazon as well. It's where we get everything these days, it seems like. So I'm going to just tape that on. And I don't need to put a whole lot of tape on this, just enough to keep it in place while I make the adjustment, like draw the new line on the pattern piece. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I just use this like, it's kind of like a Sharpie fine liner. I use these a lot. I know I probably should use pencil, but this just shows up so much better. And then if you can see, the top of my template doesn't extend to the top of this. That's okay. So what I'm going to do, I have like a curved ruler meant for tailoring. So I am going to pull that out, and then I'm just going to extend the line just straight on up to the top of the waistline here. If I need to make adjustments to like the height of the waistline, I can do that, once the pants are basted together, and it's not a big deal. At least I haven't found it to be a big deal. It's nothing like trying to get this crotch curve to fit your own personal body as well as you can. That to me is a lot trickier, at least in my experience. So I'm going to go get that curved ruler, and I'll be right back. So this is something else I probably got on Amazon. It's just your standard little tailor's curve, I think it's called, or something like that. And I just kind of match it up to, it's not going to be perfect. Like the curve doesn't fit this pattern piece just perfect because my body's not shaped like that. My body's shaped like this paper template here. So just as best as you can. I kind of tend to find like the straight part, like as if this line was just going to extend straight on up, like draw it right onto the pattern piece. Again, this is just how I do it. I'm sure there probably are better and easier ways, but I've never had any sewing classes or anybody to teach me these things. So I just kind of figure it out and do kind of what works. So I've got my line there. Hope that's showing up. And one other thing to note about this template that I made, you'll notice that it doesn't come all the way over to the outer edge of the leg here. And it's okay. It doesn't need to, because this is not going to change. This is still going to fit my body just fine. The tricky part was this right here. So there's no more markings to make. And I'm going to go ahead and take this. I want to lift this up carefully and just make sure my line transferred before I cut the tape off of this. And I've got my paper scissors here. So all I'm going to do now is just to cut the tissue right along the new line. And it might actually be easier to cut the template off before cutting out the new pattern piece, if that makes sense. Yeah, so you can see, I guess you could see that. I hope that you can. There's the new line right there that I'm just going to cut down. So now I've got my new pattern piece that should fit my body, and it seems kind of rudimentary, but like I said, it works for me. I've used these several times now, and so far so good. The only other thing that I want to do is to measure the inseam on this piece and make sure that that's good. And if I need to lengthen it, there's the lengthen and shorten line right here. So it calls for a 1 1/4 inch hem. So I'm going to start the measure right there. And it's a 26-inch inseam. And I was thinking 26 inches sounds kind of short. I don't have my own inseam measurement memorized, which I should, but it sounded kind of not as long as I thought it should. And I got to looking again. Silly me, I'm so guilty of just jumping right in without reading and looking closely at everything I need to know ahead of time. So while I'm doing view E, I hope that's showing up, but I'm feeling like it's foggy, blurry. So view E is the longer of the pants. There is a shorter version here. I am doing the longer version, but even the longer version is not what I would call long. Like they're coming above the model's ankles right here. That is not what I want at all for these pants. So I'm going to go ahead and add like 6 inches onto the lengthen and shorten. That'll put it at 32, and it'll allow me plenty of wiggle room at the bottom to hem them up. So we'll see. I think that that'll be like a good plan. I'm hoping that it will. Watch this pants that I'm showing you guys in detail. It'll be like the first one I do that totally flop. Not the first one I do that totally flops. I have flopped many pairs of pants in my life, but since I got my new system in place, they've all luckily come out pretty good. So I'm hoping that these will too. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and let's do that now. So I'm just going to cut it on the lengthen and shorten line. And this is where my tracing paper will come in very handy. So I've cut my two leg pieces apart here at the lengthen and shorten line and put a piece of tracing paper under. And I'm making sure that the grain lines line up and match. And I think this is a case where they don't just have to be parallel to each other, the grain lines, they have to be exactly in line with each other. So my grain lines are perfectly in line with each other, and I've got exactly an even 6 inches in between the top piece and the bottom piece. And this 6x24 quilting ruler helps with this so much. I've used this ruler for years, mostly for quilting, but it also does come in handy for garment sewing too. So now I'm just going to tape these pieces, these two pattern pieces, to the tracing paper. We'll see how this turns out. It might be that they're going to be like way too long, but I can always, shorten them a little bit at the hem if I need to. I wasn't, like I mentioned, I just wasn't thinking that these are going to be intentionally made to be shorter pants, which I don't care for myself, especially not they're going to be worn mostly in fall and winter, so I really, really don't want that. If it was summer and I was totally on thinking in a different track and maybe some different fabric, I might not mind if they were a little bit shorter because I love capri length pants, just not ones that are just above the ankle. So I'm just making sure that everything lines up pretty well, and it's looking like it does. So now what I'm going to do is to get my curve. Is this a French curve? Maybe that's what this is. And now, of course, the outer edges of the legs are off a little bit because I've, separated them. So I think this is one of those situations where you kind of, smooth out the line as best as you can and it'll be okay because there's a lot of room in the legs. So, and I'm almost thinking rather than the curve, it might be better to use a straight edge. Let's see how that looks when I line these up. I think I'm going to go ahead and just use this straight edge because it looks like the curve of the leg kind of stops right about here and then it just straightens up as it goes down. So I'm going to go with that. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this video is not intended to be like a how-to or instructional by any means. It's kind of just walking you through my own process, hanging out with you guys while I do this. Maybe you guys can teach me a thing or two, or maybe you'll pick up a tip from me. Either way, thanks for hanging out with me while I sew. I appreciate it. And you guys can kind of hold my feet to the fire maybe so I can get some sewing done. All right. Now I've got my lines drawn to, fill in the gap here. And I'm just going to cut. Before I do that, wherever there's a corner, oftentimes I like to make sure that that's taped down just for extra stability. And the fun thing is that I'll get to do this again for the front leg. It's okay. It's all good. All right. So in theory, my back piece should be perfect for me. I'm hoping that will be the case. We'll find out as the more I make progress on these pants. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to the front leg now. Of course, before lengthening, I want to make my adjustments to the crotch curve area. And I have a separate piece here for the front. So same process like I did for the back, the exact same process, making sure that the points match here, and then making sure that the grain lines are parallel. And I'm seeing with this piece, it actually overlaps, it extends out past the pattern piece, as long as these lines are matching up. So I will need to add a little bit of tracing paper to cover that. And everything looks like it's matching up really well. Make sure my points still match there. Those are lined up. So now, while I have it just in place, I'm going to tape the template to the pattern piece. There's something really time-saving about not tracing the original pattern piece. I know that that's like the ideal way to do it just because you preserve your pattern that way and you can have all the sizes intact, but it is pretty sweet to just cut right into the tissue. Saves a lot of time. So what I'm going to do next is to slide this tracing paper under, and then I'm gonna just cut off a little strip here to work with so I don't have the whole big roll kind of in the way. I tend to be a little bit liberal with this tracing paper because I have gobs of it, like I mentioned, more than I probably will ever go through in my lifetime, even if I live to a ripe old age. But sometimes I do end up, if I'm being a little more judicious with it, I'll end up with little pieces that I could cut around, and I'll save those little pieces because they might work perfectly for a certain area where I just need a little piece to widen something or to extend something. But I think this looks pretty good here. So now I am going to tape the tracing paper in place so it doesn't scoot around while I'm working with it. So as you can see here, and I pointed out, the template extends over past the pattern a little bit, so we kind of got the opposite situation. What I'm going to do is to place the ruler, my curve ruler, kind of in line with the front, which would be like the front here of the pants, the center front seam. And I'm just going to extend that line just right up like that. One other little place I want to tape down the corner there. And I also need to trace my curve here. So that kind of leaves me with this top here. The original pattern piece stops there, but I've extended my line up to here. So I just kind of fill that in. Like I mentioned, I'm sure that this is not like the proper way to sew, but it's just something I've cobbled together that seems to work. I am always open ears if you guys have better ideas or ways of doing things. I love being able to learn from each other. And like I mentioned too, once these are basted together and I test fit them like a dry fit, if there needs to be adjustments made, I can make them at that time too. But the important adjustments will have been made. Like this might end up being too roomy here, and it'll be easy enough to take in if I need to. So I have my line drawn to make a new quote unquote pattern piece. So now I can cut these apart. And it gets a little bit awkward having three like layers of paper here, but the more I use my little template here, the much easier it becomes, and it's like not a big deal at all. I think like with any kind of tool or process that you use, the more you do it, the easier anything becomes, like second nature. And I am realizing that I did not do something else that I should have done, but it's not a deal breaker. I'm going to go ahead and cut this. I don't think it's a deal breaker, at least. I might be surprised. There is the matter of the back. I should have taped the tissue onto the pattern piece on the underside as well. I think it's going to be okay though. I can still do that. I'm hoping so anyway. Yeah. So I just kind of got this lined back up with my template here. And what I'm going to do is to get the template taped down so it doesn't shift around again. And flip it over. You can see that. So because this strip of tissue paper is going to become part of the pattern piece, I want to make sure that it gets taped down to the pattern piece really well and it's not, flopping all around. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm using a little bit bigger pieces of tape because it's not meant to be temporary. This part isn't. And I want to make sure it stays on really well. All right. Flip it back over. And now I can remove the template. I hope this all makes sense, and let me know if you guys do something similar to this, or like I mentioned, if you have a much better way. I would love to know about it. So I'm done with my template. And now you can see that, hope you can see this, the original pattern piece is right there, and my new piece extends out a little bit. So I want to make sure it's taped down good on the front. I don't want these wiggling around too much when I'm cutting out, fabric and moving the pieces around. They need to act as if they're one piece now, if that makes sense. The one thing I can do though is cut off this excess that's kind of running down the leg here. So I didn't change anything on the leg. It was only from crotch to top of waist there. And make sure that it's holding up pretty well. Everything's staying in place, so I think I'm good. Put one other piece of tape right there at the corner. Now, this changes things with the waistband because I've extended my waistband here. What I will probably do is just wait, not do anything with my waistband piece. I'm not going to make any amendments to it or cut the fabric out with that yet until I get the fabric pieces cut out of the front and back and dry fit. Then I'll see what's going on, if I need to make any adjustments with the waistband, like extending the length out like I did with the front piece here. But for now, just going to hold that little piece aside. And now I get to lengthen the front. So now I have my front piece all ready to go. And at this point, I'm ready to start cutting out my fabric pieces. The one thing I'm noticing is that I just want to make copy my notch over right there. So at this point, like I mentioned, I can go ahead and start cutting out my fabric pieces just for the front and the back, but not the waistband yet. And in the interest of this video not being like 2 hours long, I may go ahead and stop here. And then if you guys found this interesting, or if I was able to help in some way, or at least kept you company while you were sewing, let me know. And I'll go ahead, and this could be part one. And then I'll do, I could do this whole pair of pants like with you guys. So it might end up kind of being like a sew along, but not intended to be too instructional, because I don't feel qualified to instruct anyone on how to sew and get fit properly and everything like that. But it's kind of a sew with me. And let me know if you might enjoy that. And I can do the whole pants like this, just in shorter bits. Like the next one, we can cut out the fabric, and then we can start the stitching until they're all done. You guys can just hang out with me along the whole process. So I guess that's about it for today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate it. I appreciate you watching, and kind of it gives me the motivation to keep sewing on these times when life is so busy with other things that are demanding all of my attention. And if I know you guys are out there facing the same kind of things that I am, we can kind of spur each other on to get our projects done. And let me know what you're working on in the comments below. And until next time, oh, and next time might be the part 2 of this, or maybe I'll have a different topic, but it will more than likely be the part 2 of this, because I need to get these pants done. But there will be a part 2 if that's something you want to see. So until then, bye.